Ladies and gentlemen,
Recording in progress.
welcome. I'll stay standing up. Can everybody on the screen see me, Graham? So I just look this way. Where's the camera? There. Okay. Welcome everybody to the annual general meeting of Manx Wildlife Trust. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Simon Kane, and I am the chair of Manx Wildlife Trust. I was elected just over 2 years ago. First of all, I want to introduce Nigel Teasley. Nigel is the local boss of Lloyds Bank, and he's recently been appointed to that. I don't know what your correct job title is, but I'm just going to call you the boss. As of very recently, which is great news because he is a great supporter of Manx Wildlife Trust, shown by the fact that we are in their building. So first of all, Nigel's going to say a few words.
So good evening, everyone, and it's great to see so many of you here. We're delighted to welcome you all to Villiers House, to the building here. I think by Hannah at the back there. It's a great venue for hosting this, and we're delighted to continue to support Manx Wildlife Trust. Thank you again for letting me say a few words before you begin the annual general meeting as well. At Lloyds Bank, we strongly believe that the work that Manx Wildlife Trust does is critical to our well-being and to our community. And it's good to see that the importance of nature is finally being recognised in the corporate world, and that organisations are starting to think about the impact that they have on the natural environment and to incorporate this into their decision-making process. Nature does so much of the heavy lifting as we face into the climate emergency. Around half of our greenhouse gas emissions that we create obviously remain in the atmosphere, but the other half is absorbed by the land and the sea. Back in 2011, a man called Robert Costanza and his team of researchers worked out that the annual net worth of nature services to the world was at $125 trillion. To put that into perspective, the global GDP at that time was only $75 trillion. So the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity says that the benefits of sustaining ecosystems exceed costs by between 10 and 100 fold. So that's an incredibly compelling business case. I've got no doubt that this will bring many opportunities for the trust, whether that be through carbon or biodiversity credits, biodiversity net gain, and new disclosure requirements such as the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures, or involvement in the Global Biodiversity Framework. So that's the 30 by 30 target that you may have heard of. I think Leigh, Graham, and the team have been really pioneering in their work and their approach, which has put Manx Wildlife Trust and the Isle of Man on the map. I really look forward to continuing to collaborate on projects which showcase what the island can achieve going forward. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nigel. Nigel didn't say, and I will say, I want to thank him as well, not just for supporting us with allowing us to use this building, but Lloyds paid the salary of one of our members of staff, and also were the lender on the scheme whereby we purchased the new land at the Hairpin Woodland Park just on the edge of Ramsey, and they put together the financing for that, which is referred to in Leigh's report. So they're a very great supporter of us, and it's quite the impact of that is actually seen on the ground with nature. So we're really appreciative. I'll now move on to the formal part of our AGM. And we've got four items which are standard part of our AGM each year before we go on to the presentation by Leigh and by David. So first of all, I'm going to go to item 2 on our agenda, which is to approve the minutes of our last AGM, which was held here on the 26th of July 2023. I don't know if you've all had a chance to read those minutes. They were on the website and there are copies in the back of the room. Did anybody have any comments on those minutes?
Just at the start of it, where you say you signed off the minutes from the year before, it's the wrong year.
Is it? Thank you. We'll note that. Just looking at that now. Yes, well spotted. Did anybody else have any comments on the minute?
If you're going to be amending, we might as well. I'm not a doctor.
We have.
Dan is a doctor.
Oh,
I can't claim the credit for that.
Do you want to be?
Well, that would be nice, but we didn't get that far.
where's that? Anyway.
It's the attendees at the start.
Okay. So can I have somebody who would like to do we need a proposer and a seconder?
Yes,
Somebody to propose that we approve these minutes. We have John Hunter in the back. And anybody have to second that resolution? I've got Magnus is going to second that resolution. Thank you. So all in favour of those approving those minutes? Thank you. Anybody against? No. So that's been passed. Thank you very much. So I'll now go on to the second item on our agenda. This is our Treasurer Anthony to present for approval our annual accounts for the year ended 31st of January 2024. This is Anthony, our Treasurer. Do you want to say a few words about the accounts?
I'll say a few. I'll try to keep it a few. Because as much as it's great to see everyone here, I'm sure they're not all here to hear me speak about the accounts. I'm sure there's other items on the agenda that are probably far more worthy of your attention. But thank you for coming. Thank you, I have to say, to Kat Whitaker and the team at Number One Accounts. They've worked really hard to get this far.
Yes.
And thank you also to the Finance Committee, who I think are all here this evening, for their support in getting it to this stage. So and throughout the year, the work that is being done there and at Council well when it is considering the various funds. It's all good governance. So thank you all for your input. I'll just lead you through some of the top highlights, I call them highlights of the accounts. And bust a few myths maybe along the way. The great news is there's a very healthy surplus for the year, and it's on page 8, the profit and loss statement of just over £328,000. But before we get too carried away, I wouldn't want you to be misled, because that figure is heavily distorted by one donation in particular from Aviva. And it was for the purchase of Craigie Cowan. And I'm sure Leigh will be talking about that later, and you'll all know about it. But we have to account for it this way. We treat it as revenue income, but of course the purchase of the site itself is through capital, and so that's not reflected in the profit and loss statement. So that does distort, kind of overstates the surplus position. It's not part of the ongoing trading, if you like, for the year. And if you strip that out, there's still a surplus, so it's still good news. And it was just under £13,500. And you know that's a good position to be in. When we set the budget for last year, And that was the first budget that Manx Wildlife Trust had actually set and got into setting an annual budget. We basically budgeted for a break-even position, less than £1,000. So to achieve £13,500 is a pretty solid position for the year. So well done to all those involved. Obviously, the purchase of the Craigie Cowan has improved the balance sheet as well in terms of the fixed asset. The value on the fixed asset has increased by £370,000. So that's the Craigie Cowan, plus there's other items in there as well, like Persags, the parcel of land at the Corricks. Note 10A has got all of that information if you are interested. So, I think the accounts are really, if you want to understand the accounts, you need to understand that transaction and the impact that's had on both the balance sheet and the profit and loss account. The other thing is, we need to understand that consultancy income is now accounted for under Wildlife Limited, under the subsidiary accounts rather than through the main accounts. So if you're looking at the profit and loss and wondering why there's no consultancy income, which was a big contributor in the previous year, that's because it's now reflected elsewhere within the subsidiary rather than coming straight in there. And the reasons for that, I think, were to do with the management of risks that is associated with that, to keep that separate from Manx Wildlife Trust accounts. That I'd say that has helped contribute to a very healthy dividend from the Wildlife Trust, which did very well that year. There's a dividend of £84,000. And I think the performance of the shop also has been extremely positive. It's been a very positive contributor towards the income position of the Manx Wildlife Trust. So thank you to all those involved with the shop. I do understand that the changes that have been made there have been really very, very beneficial. As was the case in the last few years, there's been a very healthy variety of income sources coming in, really very diverse. So, there's various sponsorship grants that are coming in, really quite substantial. And it's great that all these organisations are supporting the trust. There's obviously the subscriptions, and the corporate memberships, and the individual memberships. It all contributes. There's contract income, the calf income is there, and as well as all the donations and the fundraising activities, and all of that contributes to help keep Manx Wildlife Trust in a healthy position so it can continue to fund the day-to-day activities of the charity, and that's what it's all about at the end of the day. I don't really have anything more to say. I think those are the highlights. I will take questions if there are any. Otherwise, we will need a proposer and a seconder.
Would anybody like to propose? Amy is proposing. Anybody would like to second the resolution? So that's Kim. So are we all in favour of the resolution that we approve those accounts? All in favour? Thank you very much. Anybody against? No, none against. Thank you very much. The next resolution is to approve the appointment of our auditors. The auditors have actually changed their name. The agenda refers to them as being Moore Stevens. They have in fact changed their name to Moore Dixon, but it is the same firm. So this is to approve the reappointment of Moore Dixon as auditors and to approve their remuneration in such terms as shall be approved by council. So again, can we have somebody to propose that resolution, please? Anybody? Felicity? Anybody to second that resolution? Amy? Thank you. All in favour of that resolution? Anybody against? No, so that's carried as well. Thank you very much. I'll stand up for this bit. So the next item is again a routine resolution. However, I need to apologise because we made a mistake, and on rectifying it, it still wasn't quite right. So I just need to clarify that the 4 members of council, in fact, some of the people listening on the screen won't know this, for which I apologise as well. The 4 members of council who are up for re-election are in fact Sophie Pearce, me, Paul Thomas, and Keir Powell Lewis. And unfortunately, none of the other 3 are here tonight for a whole variety of different reasons, which I won't bore you with going through. But I will just say a few words about the other 3 who are up for re-election, because I think it's only right, you know, who we're talking about. So Sophie has, in fact, all 3 joined about the same time, about 3 years ago. Keir came on slightly later. Sophie is, I'm going to say a few words about, because they're not here. So Sophie is our company secretary, and she is a very valuable member of council. She's actually also on the Manx Lottery Trust, so she has a really valuable insight into the corporate governance of charities on the Isle of Man, which is, you know, extremely useful, and a really valued member of council. Paul Thomas joined at the same time as Sophie. I think it was about 3 years ago. Again, very valuable member of council, and has a great interest in wildlife and works in government. A lot of valuable contributions. Keir Powell Lewis. Keir actually lives in London, and works in, actually, I'm going to get this wrong if I say the actual organisation he works for, but he works in the sort of museum sector. He brings in valuable insight. He's younger than the rest of us as well. He's the one person who always disagrees with me, which I always enjoy. I think it was, and forget, I'm going off the tangent, which I will not do. But he's a very, again, he's always telling us how we must make sure we improve our strategy documentation and make sure our strategy is right. And I think without him and without the other 2, well, I think all 3 of them make me a much better chair. Let's put it that way. So I value them both. Oh, sorry, I value all 3 of them very much. So now the 4th person who's up for re-election is me. So I'm not going to say anything about me, but what I'm going to suggest, however, is, unless anybody objects, that we just have one vote to re-elect all 4 of us together. We have a requirement that 1/3 of council are re-elected each year, so that's the 4 of us together. So I'm going to suggest we have one vote to do that, if everybody's happy with that. So is anybody going to propose that resolution? Okay, Roger, and anybody happy to second that resolution? Thank you. What was your name again, sir? David. And
Sorry, what's the surname?
Elliot.
Sorry, I'm not.
Elliot. ELYAN.
Thank you.
all in favour? Thank you very much indeed. Anybody against? No, none against. Thank you very much. So that completes the sort of formal part of our AGM, in terms of the standard resolutions that we have to go through each year. So next item is for our CEO, Leigh Morris, to present his report, which was circulated already. So I hope some of you had a chance to read it. Leigh.
Thank you, Simon. Hopefully you've had a chance to read my report. I was conscious last year, I think someone had timed me. It was a good length. I'm going to try and keep it a bit shorter this year, and that's for 2 reasons. One is save your time, but secondly, we've got 2 presentations this evening, and I'll say a little bit about David later. But we've got our new head of conservation and land, David Bellamy, is going to do a presentation with some slides. So I'm keen that we give David a good piece. But I do feel it's worth me going through and just highlighting a few points from the report that I feel the CEO report were highlights from last year. It was our 50th anniversary year last year, and I think the 50th anniversary year was done tremendously well. It was a really important year for us, and we had some great events, and we had some notable moments, such as the Temperate Rainforest Project with Aviva at Craigie Cowan. I think for me, one of the key issues of last year, and has been since I arrived here 4.5 years ago, was securing conservation focus and leadership. Now, that might sound that's crazy. You're a wildlife trust, you're 50 years old. Surely you've got conservation focus and leadership. Yes, but we've never had a head of conservation before as a charity. And I think that's an indication of how we've grown to a place from the days where two of our founders, I know, sat second row in, set it up as volunteers. And we're now to a world where we've got someone who's the right person in the right role to really give us that conservation leadership. So for me, that's something I've been keen to try and get over the line since I arrived, and I'm really delighted they're in there, and I look forward to introducing David to you shortly. We're also keen in terms of strategy. We had some new thinking from one of our trustees, Magnus, who's also sat here, about crux issues. And that's really drilling in. I've been involved in strategy development in various organisations, but I think for me, it was genuinely a moment where it was, well, you know, yes, we need a mission and a vision, and we need the bits of paper, and we need to communicate to people what we're doing, be that you, our members, most importantly, or government or other partners. But what are the real crux things that we need to do to deliver what we want? And I think that clarity of thinking's got us all thinking, and we're now coming around to the point where we're going to look at crux issues too, because one of our crux issues, top of the list, was we needed a head of conservation to give us a real strategic focus for our conservation work, and we've done that. So that's been some really quite refreshing thinking for me, and I think the whole organisation. As Simon said, we set up Ecology Banning as our consultancy business, and we moved that now into our trading arm. Ecology Banning is an important business for us. Yes, I'm not going to shirk the fact that it brings us in some income, but 100% the most important thing that Ecology Banning business does for us is it gives us a stake in the game for development projects in the Isle of Man. You know, we have a clear red line on projects that we haven't worked on in the past. We've walked away from some. I'm not going to say what they were, but we do have a red line. But also, even for you could argue, the most controversial projects, what our ecologists will do is give the absolute best advice and insight into nature on the Isle of Man, where if consultants are flown in from across, they won't have the time, they won't have the insight, and they won't give the best advice. So there's a genuine conservation reason why we're looking at Ecology Banning. And we employed, Touchwood, a great young person in Greg Watson now, who's our trainee ecologist, and his graph's going up, and he's also our administrator. So great new person in the team there. Again, we mentioned the shop, and the alley effect, as I'll call it, in our shop has been transformational in terms of our gift shop and also the products that are sold in our two nature discovery centres. Sustainable products now. And one tiny example of that is at Festival of the Sea last year, there were lots of little plastic toys for the kids to buy at Festival of the Sea, and we sold them all. And we all thought, well, that's nice. It's brought us a bit of money for conservation work, but we've been selling little bits of plastic at Marine Festival. Well, this year, I was delighted to see that we've now got completely sustainable and ethical little small toys for children made out of bamboo and various other things that are ethically sourced, made out of things that are not plastic. And that's one tiny impact of the alley effect in our retail offer. So well done, Ali. Although it's Manx Wildlife Trust AGM, I am going to highlight the appointment by DEFRA of a new Chief Officer, Scott Gallagher. I'm not going to wax lyrically about, you know, first impressions of Scott, or now he's a year in. But what I would say is, irrespective of how, you know, good or not Scott might be as a person and his motivations, in my nearly 5 years here now, 3+ of those years, we've had interim or stand-in chief officers in the most important department for us. And no matter who they are, they're never going to be empowered to make the decisions that we as a charity want to be working with them on. But we now have a permanent chief officer in DEFRA, and that's a definite step forward. And actually, I am enjoying working with Scott Gallagher as well. We remain firm advocates of the UNESCO biosphere, And you'll see that changes are afoot now with the advertising to appoint a new chair. That will go to the next level. Our engagement with the wider Wildlife Trust has been really positive over the reporting year. For the 50th anniversary, we had Liz Bonnan, who's the president, and Craig Bennett, who's the CEO of the Central Wildlife Trust team based in Newark. They came to the island, brought a team with them. We ran 2 fantastic live streamed events, one from the MNH Museum, the other one from this very room in here, engaging with the whole of the Wildlife Trust Federation. And it really showcased the Isle of Man. And Graham says this, and quite rightly, as one of the smallest wildlife trusts in terms of our size and turnover, we're growing, but we are still, let's say, one of the smallest 5. We certainly bat above our weight in being a whole nation. We're the only whole nation biosphere. We're the only, there's only 3 whole nation wildlife trusts: Scotland, Ulster, and ourselves. And I think, the team does a fantastic job in that. So, and the Wildlife Trust Federation, I'm proud to wear a badger on my badge, but just below the little turn. So the 50th anniversary was great. The Isle of Man Chamber of Commerce chose us to be their charity partner for 2 years. Again, that puts us in a strong place, and it was lovely to hear from Nigel and the support from Lloyds Bank, be it this building or for Hannah or for helping us with the cross-ex financing. It's genuinely, occasionally people will talk about corporates in being greenwashing, the greenwashing. Well, I'm sorry, I don't buy into that. There's certainly greenwashing in the world, but not everyone that doesn't work in a wildlife trust doesn't care about the environment and sustainability. And I think there's an awful lot of people in commerce on this island that really have some values akin to ours, and we want to work with those people and they want to work with us, and there's real benefits from us working with some of those people and organisations to make positive changes to the island, and it's great to be the charity partner of choice for Chamber of Commerce. We also, beyond our island, we have engaged strongly with UK Overseas Territories Conservation Forum. We were a member of that club with the UCOTS and the other Crown dependencies, and delightfully at the Inter-Island Environment meeting last year, which myself, Graham and Lara attended, and that is the Inter-Island Environment meeting for governments and NGOs across the Crown dependencies, so Channel Islands and ourselves, Guernsey, Jersey, Isle of Man, plus other British islands who attend, so the Isle of Wight send a delegation every year, Scoma go. For the first time ever next year, they've agreed that the Isle of Man can host the Inter-Island Environment meeting. And for many of our corporate partners, they have offices across all the Crown dependencies. And so there's a huge enthusiasm now about how we can join the dots up. And actually, first and foremost, it's about the Isle of Man. But we live in, as the Isle of Man, I know this. We might be one of the smallest wildlife trusts, but in terms of those small island nations, we're at a leader. We have an opportunity to really help some of the other islands and showcase what we're doing in the Isle of Man, both across Crown dependencies, but wider territories. So definitely not top of our list, but definitely something that's important for us. Why we're really here is biodiversity conservation. I make no apologies for not being a trained ecologist. I've worked in environmental jobs since I was 16, and hopefully I've got a good toolkit and lots of other skills from horticulture and education, and I could even identify a couple of birds. I did pass all the birds that we had on the quiz at the Festival of the Sea, which I couldn't have done 5 years ago. But that aside, we absolutely needed strong conservation leadership. We need someone, a person in the role who is absolutely at core a conservationist, and again we have that person, and David's going to be speaking to you. So getting that post and getting that person in post, I repeat it from the start, that is something beyond the land and the 50th anniversary and everything else. I think that is the biggest landmark moment for the Wildlife Trust in my mind this year, is getting us that conservation focus and leadership. David appointed his successor. His first job was to get his replacement, and we're delighted that we've appointed Katie Grace. And interestingly, Katie was on the island. And just in terms, I do believe in synchronicity, but Katie's degree was in agriculture and environment, and her dissertation was on the impact of agri-environment schemes for nature. So you might say she had a great CV for the job. Alongside that, David and others, cross-island group, we've got a farmland birds group now, and they're doing direct benefits, tree sparrows, curlew monitoring. Hopefully, we keep having odd sightings of lapwings, but direct impact for farmland birds to really make a difference. We carried out the first survey of the wallabies, and we released that data last year. And on the back of that, DEFRA carried out a far wider survey this year of wallabies and goats to give us some information about the large non-natives, which again was a great step forward. Our biological recording has gone hugely forward this year with the appointment of Dr. Jennifer Sharp into the role of biological recorder, working with Dr. Philippa Tomlinson and David and the rest of the team. And that really gives us the underpinning knowledge to A, prioritise what we're doing, and B, judge if we're making success going forward. So really good, and again, totally aligned with what DEFRA are trying to achieve as well. That's really strong. The temperate rainforest projects and the whole project about woodlands is important for us. 105 acres at Creddy Cowan in this reporting year. And another piece of land at Gley on Darrock, it's now our biggest reserve, 177 acres has come our way. And the Aviva project has now funded a woodland team expansion that's going to, we've appointed now a new woodlands officer. Milltown are a fantastic partner with us to grow the trees that we need for the island. And we've got a wonderful relationship with the Isle of Man Woodland Trust, who've been fantastic in working with us for volunteers to help get the trees in the ground. So, and we're planting the right trees in the right place, in land that is not producing food for the island. So that is, we are making sure that we join all the dots in that work, so that we want to be adding to the island's nature and biodiversity and plant the right trees, create the right habitats with no negative impact. So that's really, really exciting. The partnership at Milltown genuinely is a wonderful partnership. And Hannah sat at the back as our Lloyds Community Ranger. She was at Milltown. I won't ask you to speak, but if we go over Hannah Banner from. She was at Milltown today, I know, with a community group that's now established, doing community gardening in the walled garden with volunteers. And today one of the volunteers brought a local youth group along from Ramsey to engage with nature and food growing in the Milltown garden. I mean, that is brilliant stuff. And Onchan has been transformed now. It's now an Onchan community wetlands. And we've got a community group involved there. And although it's not in the reporting year, there's soon to be a new community group launched at Government House as well. So really through Team Wilder and Lucy, who's not here, really trying to get more stronger links into the community to get people on board. So that's been brilliant. In terms of the marine work, I'm conscious of not stealing David's thunder on this, but I'll just give a quick mention to the Manx Eelgrass Group, funded by KPMG, and the wider work with the Wildlife Trust, who've got an Irish Sea group now, with England, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, I know, it's all working together on the same table, trying to come up with holistic vision for marine spatial planning in the Irish Sea, which is quite exciting. Our nature reserves have increased and expanded, and ultimately, whatever we do with farmers or with developers or with education or engagement, ultimately, if we have land and we bank it and we look after it, job done. And so having nature reserves is still important for us. That was traditionally why Wildlife Trust was set up. And that's why it's important, funding legacies, anything that gets us land that we bank, it's safe. And I think that's, again, coming back to the carbon credit scheme, we offer high integrity carbon credits. There's no greenwashing. The funding, the project that we launched just at the end of this reporting year, funded by Lloyds, but with 4 businesses on the island working with us, that's going to plant real broadleaf forests in the right place, run by the Wildlife Trust, planted by volunteers. The corps can even come and plant them. And it's going to give really strong biodiversity and habitat in the right place. There's no greenwashing. And the ultimate insurance on that is that if the trees die, we're not going to quibble over getting more money, because we want the best forest. We're going to go back and plant them. So it really is a strong way of working, we believe. Ballacrint was officially open to members. So I don't know how many of you have been. Quick show of hands. Has anyone been to Ballacrint since we owned it for members? Need to put a resolution next year. Yeah, everyone should go. But that's a small step, and I know Graham was keen on this to really, get our nature reserves and get a bit more of an offer for members, so that they rightly feel special and can go and visit special places. And the Hairpin Woodland Park, which officially opened after the year we're talking about, is becoming our major engagement space. I want to give a quick praise to Graham. Well done. I think you've had a sterling year, especially with the 50th anniversary year. Massive help to me to have Graham and now David, so heads of conservation and engagement. Tremendous role. And anniversary ball. Hopefully, I know some of you were at the volunteers event at Government House we held in August. we had a Manx Wildlife Trust set of stamps, a Manx Wildlife Trust set of coins. I mean, imagine, you know, Yorkshire Wildlife Trust with a 18 million turnover don't have a set of stamps and coins. And I think that's an example of how as a full island nation, we can absolutely be strong. Tricia Sale, we celebrated, and Tricia worked for us for 25 years last August. So the longest serving member of staff at the Wildlife Trust, and Andre's not far behind on 20. So it was wonderful that Tricia celebrated her 25th year and our 50th year. Well, the nicest thing about me from our 50th anniversary year, beyond the appointment of Head of Conservation, but in terms of our volunteers, was the setting up of our Green Champions. And again, there's two of them in the room. This, forgive my pronunciation, but Feniglassi, which is in the Manx translation for Green Champions. And these are for people who we feel in a lifetime of achievement for the charity have just gone above and beyond as volunteers. And so it was wonderful to have I'm going to say, you can't have an informal dinner at Government House, can you, David? So it was a formal dinner for our Green Champions, but quite informal. And I think, thank you to our patrons, His Excellency John and Lady Lorimer for their patronage this year as well. I'm nearly done because I did say I wasn't going to talk for long. Team Wild and Lucy I mentioned, tremendous. Lloyds Bank I mentioned, Hannah and the work you've done, tremendous. Last thing around engagement would be our artists in residence. So we, in partnership with the Isle of Man Arts Council and Biosphere, we appointed our first artist in residence, which was Claire Payne, Claire Rogerson brackets. And she was such a success. She was so brilliant that the Arts Council came back and agreed to fund for 3 more years an artist in residence programme. And so our second artist in residence was Ali Hodgson, and Ali again has done a brilliant job. And we're hoping, and I'm certainly hoping, this becomes part of the culture that we have an artist in residence, and if the Art Council funding runs out, we find another way to fund it, because I think what they're delivering as artists is wonderful for us on the island. So long may that continue. A personal highlight for me last year was that Graham and Lucy's encouragement, part of our aim to engage with more people in the island and nature benefiting people as well as us benefiting nature, was that we attended a mental health first aid course. And I agreed to do it. I agreed to do it because Graham and Lucy and Hannah, to be fair, asked me if I'd do it. And I didn't want to lead from the front on this. So I went along, and when I got there, I think I asked how long was the course? I think was my question, Hannah, thinking it was going to be 2 hours on Zoom or something. Was it 2 full days, or was it? Yes, and the 2 days on mental. It was a fantastic course, and it could have been 2 weeks. And I think all of us learned and shared a lot in that 2-day mental health first aid course. I encourage anyone, if they haven't done it. Has anyone done that course in the room apart from me? And Graham, I know other corporates are doing it. If you get the chance, do it. It's a very good course. I wish I'd known about it for family, friends, previous staff I've worked with. I think it would have been something as a life skill to have had. But tremendous course. Last thing I'll mention is formal education. We were very sad when Dawn Colley, who'd been brilliant with us for years, left. And how do you replace Dawn? Well, we've replaced Dawn with someone as brilliant in Beth, and so we now have Beth Penhall-Urick is our, and she started actually in that 50th anniversary week when all the Wildlife Trust CEO and president were here. So for Beth, it was the norm was to have all these celebrities from the Wildlife Trust here. We're now looking very much at an entitlement for every Manx child. How do we do that? We want to get every child in the Isle of Man to have an experience of nature. We want to get them all to do rock pulling. We want to get them all to go and walk in the wood or climb a hill. And we've got a partner now with the Outdoor Learning Centre that's going to enable us to do that, because the government are funding for every year 10 child to go to Ardwallen, the Outdoor Learning Centre, and we're going to partner with them on a nature experience while they then spend half a day doing outdoor activities. And so we're going to get to every child in the island. So in 5 years' time, hopefully people will be looking back on when they did their Manx Wildlife Trust bit, and they walked in a wood, they did a rock pull, they maybe collected something. So we get to every kid. How amazing is that? And that's happening. So it's been a very special year for Manx Wildlife Trust, be it 50th, engagement, etc., etc. So sincere thanks to all our members, supporters, partners for working with us. It's very sometimes that my hardest challenge is that the island's a wonderful place. Why do we need a wildlife trust? Well, we do. I think our founders would say we definitely do. There's certainly lots we need to do. And I think I work with a great team of people. Management's easy, as I say to Simon. You just employ brilliant people, make sure they have a similar vision, and let them crack on. And I think I'm right for doing that. So I've got some brilliant people I work with. So thank you. Right, I'm gonna have. We're going to do questions at the end. I'm keen that David gets the floor, but let's do that. Let's let David present, and if anyone's got any questions for either me or David, or Simon, or anyone, or the other trustees, we'll take questions at the end. But I'd very delighted to introduce our relatively new Head of Conservation and Land, David, to do a presentation for you, David Bellamy.
So, yes, do you want to take a seat where you can see
Yeah.
the tree themselves? Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. First night. Can everybody see the screen before I begin? Everyone happy? Fantastic. So what I want to do is just take 20 minutes or so to do a trot through the past, present, and future of nature conservation on the Isle of Man, going back quite a long way, and hopefully looking quite far in the future to kind of set the context of why we exist, the work that we do, and the challenges that we face as a nature conservation charity on the Isle of Man. And so I said we'll go back a long way. We're going back to 1652, to really when the Isle of Man's conservation challenges started. So this drawing is by an artist, probably quite a poor artist, and called Daniel King, back, as I mentioned, in 1652, and it represents a great auk, which was known on the Isle of Man as the big ewe, or ewe boar, here on the island, which is now a locally extinct bird, but also a globally extinct bird, and it is the only bird from the Isle of Man that we've lost and has been lost globally. And it was lost for anthropogenic, so human determined reasons. And I've brought this up to really highlight that our challenges, and this is really the start of what I would call the modern day biodiversity crisis, because not everyone realises that the global biodiversity crisis is also applicable to the Isle of Man. And actually, the conservation we do here has global significance, because if we decided just on the Isle of Man not to shoot those birds, then they wouldn't have gone globally extinct, just for the actions, what could have been of a small island. So that's an illustration of a great auk there. So the painting or the drawing you saw was in 1652, presumably, and that was by someone who was just on a short visit to the island, so presumably they must have been quite common if a visitor was able to find them. They were flightless birds, and they were known to, or thought to breed at least, on the flat rocks around Port St Mary and Berwick. However, just a century later, around about 1790, they were locally extinct here on the Isle of Man, and in the following century, the last breeding pair was shot on an island off Iceland, and now globally extinct. So joining a variety of species, including the Irish deer that we've lost on the Isle of Man, and indeed from the planet. However, our problems started slightly before that. So in 1781, from that year, the Calf of Man started to lose its Mount Shearwater colony, and we believe it also had a significant colony of gannets, and that was due to a Russian invasion back then, but it wasn't troops; it was longtails from a shipwreck in the Sound. Just a couple of years later was when we lost the great auk. However, conservation on the Isle of Man actually started quite a long time ago, and in 1867 our first piece of legislation was passed. That was the Seagull Preservation Act, and it wasn't actually to preserve wildlife for its own benefit, it was for our benefit. And the herring gull that you can see there is so called because it used to clean up after the herring gulls on the beaches here of Douglas, Ramsey and Peel, So at the end of the day, they would come in and clean all the guts and other nasty things that were littering the beaches. And as their numbers declined through people gathering eggs and eating them in times of great poverty on the island, people realised that actually we were suffering as a species ourselves from the decline of another. In 1892, the Port Air and Marine Laboratory was established, and it's a great shame that we no longer have that. But it conducted over a century of sterling scientific work, and not many people realise this. It was one of the first places in the world that detected anthropogenic climate change. And the data set of measuring the sea level height and temperature and salinity and so on and so forth continues to this day through DEFRA's monitoring there. So that's our longest environmental record as a nation, but also one of the longest on the planet, is the conditions of Port Erin Bay. In the 1930s, we had the Wild Bird Protection Act, so basically expanding what was largely just for gulls in the past. And as a consequence from that, just a few years later, we had our first protected area on the Isle of Man, which was Langness and Derby Haven. And this is an interesting story because an example of Paper Park, perhaps, because a few years later, and to be fair, it was World War II, but half of that site was lost to the development of an airfield. But bizarrely, half of Runnelsway Airport is still a designated bird sanctuary, which is just a bit strange and relevant at the minute, I think, with discussions going on in Derby. In World War II, the first edition of Peregrine, which is the Journal of Manx National History, came out, and that's still published to this day. So now we're starting to get a more in-depth data set for the island's bird life, at least. In the 50s, the Manx Museum had a legislative change to make it the Manx Museum and National Trust. So the National Trust is a separate committee within Manx National Heritage, and that allowed it to own, buy and manage land for the first time. And therefore, a couple of years later, the Calf of Man was transferred from the National Trust of England and Wales over to our own Isle of Man National Trust. 2 decades later, Manx Wildlife Trust was formed on the 6th of March 1973, and only within a year had its first reserve, which was Marnell Reservoir. And of course, and I'll go on a little bit more about this, so we've now got a network of 29 reserves, and we also manage the Calf of Man on behalf of Manx National Heritage. In 1975, the first work was done to really look at Manx nature conservation in a holistic sense, and a map was produced of all the sites of outstanding natural history interests that needed protection. And sadly, to this day, the vast majority of these sites still have got no legal protection on the Isle of Man. And that was work started by the government before I was born. So, you know, the challenges, recognised necessities, you still haven't gone away. In 1984, the Flora of the Isle of Man was published. So that was adding to our knowledge of, we already had a knowledge of birds, but starting to bring really, really good knowledge of plants. And that's still the best written text on the Isle of Man's habitats and wildflowers. In 86, Birds of the Isle of Man came out. So we're starting now to really understand the island. And these are really, really important texts. And certainly for birds and plants, we have a really, really good understanding of what we have, where it lives, and also what we've lost. And because of the work started a century before with the Port Erin Marine Lab, in the late 80s, Port Erin Bay was closed to fishing, which then in time became a marine nature reserve. So that site has been undisturbed for quite a significant amount of time. But most importantly, in 1990, we had the Wildlife Act. So that and that repealed a lot of the former legislation. And that is our single most important tool that we have on the Isle of Man for wildlife conservation. You know, in legislative terms, it's really the only thing we've got, and a really, really important document. Of course, it's over 30 years old now, so it's starting to show its age. And in the UK, they've updated theirs 4 times since ours was passed. So it is definitely dated now, but still the most important tool that we have. Into the 90s then, a global review in 1992 identified 5 parts of the Isle of Man that were of international significance for bird life, one of which is the Isle of Man Hills, the Isle of Man Rocky Coast, including what you can see behind me is another site. We've got the Calf of Man, the Ayers and the Belaf Curragh completing those. So again, I don't think many Manx people understand that what we have is of global significance. In the mid 1990s, MWT were involved in the Manx Hill Land Seminar, and that finally put a stop to further afforestation of the heather moorland on the Isle of Man as monoculture conifer plantations. 1996, we had our first area of special scientific interest, and that had been enabled by the Wildlife Act. So it took 6 years to get there, and the designation was government land, so a really easy win. But it was quite nice that the Central Airs, which is probably our most important site for nature on the Isle of Man, was the first designation. And a few years later, that became a national nature reserve, which the difference is National Nature Reserve has its own set of bylaws, so its own legally enforceable legislation. So, for example, on the Airs, in summer, you must by law have a dog on a lead that's less than 3 meters in length. So really stringent protection for sites like that. And in that same year, we saw the return of the Manx shearwater to the Calf of Man, which it did all by itself, although some very limited work had been going on for a few years in getting the number of rodents down. But they bred successfully in the year 2000. A few years later, we had a pilot agri-environment scheme. So it was a very small step, and as you'll see later, it didn't last very long. But this was an important part of bringing agriculture and environmental protection together. Very important, with agriculture forming about 75% of the land use appeal. The Heath Burning Act came shortly after, and this is a terribly named law because actually it should be called the Heath Protection Act, because it basically states that all heather moorland on the Isle of Man is protected from destruction and also from unlicensed burning. So by accident, really, it was aiming to control burning, but it protected all of our heathland, which is around about a third of the island, with the stroke of a pen. In 2004, an off-island review was done looking at wetlands on the Isle of Man. And again, it recognised that 5 wetland sites on the Isle of Man were of international significance for their habitats and species. But sadly, only one of those has since been designated, which was the Balaf Curragh, just a couple of years later. So the other sites have been waiting 20 years for to have a look in. And hopefully there'll be some advancement on that in the near future. But the Manx Bird Atlas in 2007, a really useful text, and advancing that centuries worth of work in our birds. But even since then, significant changes have happened for our birds. Our first marine nature reserve, which actually wasn't Portaran Bay, it was Ramsey Bay, came in 2011. And that's lauded globally as an excellent example of fisheries and conservation working hand in hand. And in 2012, given that Manx shearwaters have started breeding on the calf again, but they were only in very small numbers, and it was clear that they were being limited by the rodents there. So a decade ago, a huge campaign was taken to eradicate longtails from the Calf of Man, and the numbers were released yesterday by the team there of 1,500 pairs on the calf this year. So an incredible trajectory, and in nature conservation, you rarely look at graphs that are going up. So this is really nice, and it just goes to show that nature is capable of an incredible recovery if we just set the conditions for that to happen. And we only plan for Manx shearwaters, but the calf now has got about 120 pairs of ground nesting eider. Numbers of wheatear are going through the roof, so there's around about 100 pairs of ground nesting wheatear as well. And we're hopeful that other things will benefit. Puffins are taking a little bit longer than we'd like, but they'll be there, I'm confident, one day breeding again, and perhaps in time gannets too. So coming back into the last decade then, sadly, the pilot agri-environment scheme was axed in 2014 as a result of the kind of the VAT agreement with the UK and government funds becoming tight, all as a legacy of the 2008 financial crash. But bizarrely, the next year we decided we needed a biodiversity strategy, and then we became a biosphere reserve, which is at the time quite odd that we had for a biosphere no agri-environment scheme, and I could argue as a consequence of that, our most recent extinction of an island species, or sorry, a bird species that we're aware of, was the yellowhammer, which is a farmland bird, which is completely wed to farmland and the way that it's managed. On plus notes, in 2018, we got 9 further nature reserves. So Ramsey Bay was the first one. Actually, now it's quite amazing that if you drive from point of Ayr to Port Erin, there's only a tiny part of that coast where you're not within a marine nature reserve, which is quite outstanding. The next big challenge for us is the offshore areas, because there's more of the Isle of Man that's wet than dry, and we've only really looked at the coastal fringe so far. But of course, we do go halfway to the surrounding islands, well, or 12 miles, I should say, in some places. So there's a significant amount. I think it's 2,700 square kilometres is Manx territorial waters, with some really significant habitats in there. The Point of Ayr became a nature reserve in 2019, with Manx BirdLife owning that. So we've got to say now it's not just Manx Wildlife Trust managing nature reserves, which is excellent, and that's a really, really important site. It's starting to open to members of the public this year and will be fully open from next year. And finally, undoing those wrongs of just a couple of years before, in 2021, we got an all-island agri-environment scheme. It's well funded, it's got £2 million available per year, and it's open to all 340 farms on the island. And very importantly, in 2021, the Climate Change Act actually brought in a duty for government and all local authorities and government bodies to consider nature conservation in all of their actions. There is a bit of a loophole just in a way that they consider best. But there is that legal duty to think about biodiversity, ecosystems and ecosystem services. And it also brought in the provision for biodiversity net gain. So from next year, any work, any development must cause that site or another site to become better for nature, demonstrably better for nature than what was there beforehand. In 2021, Birds of Conservation Concern was published, and I got these at the back, which did a review of all Manx species and put 48 of them on the red list. So we're now getting through a century of understanding our birds, we're now starting to prioritise which are most in trouble and where we need to work hardest. And Manx BirdLife produced that. It was such a good document that a year later, we stole their idea, Manx Wildlife Trust, and did a version for plants. And this found, sadly, that since the Victorian period, we've lost 45 species of plants from the Isle of Man, including juniper and a couple of orchids. So we're now in the process of coming up with biodiversity action plans for these, and also reintroducing species like the juniper to our hills. That's a review of the birds there, and you'll see certainly if you in the bottom right there, if you nest on the ground like many of our birds do, then you face challenges that none of the others face. So ground nesting birds is a real important area for us, and hence, as Leigh mentioned, we've now set up the Manx Farmland Bird Recovery Group. And that document went out to outline that, you know, locally extinct and globally for the great auk, we've lost a huge number of birds completely, and some that we only get as winter visitors, given that we don't really get any frosts or snow on the Isle of Man, but that used to breed here. Probably the next, sadly, is the lapwing. We're aware of one pair that bred on the island this year, and sadly, when you get down to single figures, you know, there's not much we can do with that. But one of those reasons is farming, and farming has changed absolutely significantly just in one human lifespan. You know, there's people alive on the Isle of Man today who remember ploughing with a horse, and whole families taking in the hay by hand. And now there's one farm on the island that produces 3,500 plastic wrapped round bales on each cut of silage, and they do 4 cuts a year. So that is industrial agriculture, which we do have on the island, and therefore, you know, lots of our farmland wildlife has struggled. But now through the scheme, 35 different initiatives will pay you for leaving crop stubbles that you'll see on the right that are great for farmland birds, whereas in the past they used to either be ploughed in or just burnt. Creating new habitats. That's a dove there that was created only in 2007 or was, and now it's just a wealth of wildlife. And for doing things like organic farming here, this is organic oats down at the Great Meadow, or on non-organic farmland, just reducing chemical use throughout. So that was a bit of a trot through our the past and how we got here today. So I'll have a very quick look at the present and the current state of play of nature conservation on the island. So in 2022, Tim Ward very significantly acknowledged, to quote them, the global biodiversity and ecological crisis, and it recommitted its support to the island's biodiversity strategy. So our own national parliament is on record now as saying there is a global crisis of which the Isle of Man is not immune. Now, these were really warm and welcome words, but sadly they didn't come with an extra penny of funding for nature conservation, and nor any other resources for government or otherwise. So I think it's fair to say they've really failed since 2022 to actually acknowledge, or sorry, address what they have acknowledged. And off island, also in the same year, the Convention of Biological Diversity set the whole world an ambition of 30 by 30. And what that means is that by the year 2030, 30% of the world's land and seas will be managed or protected through nature. And while 30 by 30 sounds nice and it's a nice round number, actually quite a lot of science has gone into that, and it looks at a planetary level that for us to safely and sustainably coexist with all the wildlife around us, about 30% needs to be managed for wildlife's benefit primarily. And the Isle of Man is signatory voluntarily to this convention, so that now is, in international law, legally binding on the Isle of Man. And we've got a hell of a lot of work to do, because only 4% of the Isle of Man is currently protected as an area of special scientific interest, and at sea we're just shy of 11%. So we've got a big journey in just a really short period of time there. The Climate Change Act was put to good use with single-use plastic regulations coming in 2022. And what was really nice from there, overnight, those yellow polystyrene chip containers disappeared from the Isle of Man. And I was quite astounded when I went to a large conference in Belfast recently to see that their streets were still covered in these yellow polystyrene containers. So I thought, well, you wouldn't see that on the Isle of Man now. And it's nice to see that legislation can have these immediate impacts. Just within a few weeks, you won't be finding those on our beaches now. But still a huge journey ahead of us in terms of plastic use. You heard earlier, Craig Cowan was purchased in 2023. We've bought lots of nature reserves over the years, but I brought this up because this is when we moved from single field conservation to landscape scale conservation, buying a 105-acre site that comes complete with 2 rivers. That's the headwaters of the river that discharges into the sea just over here, in fact. So our ambitions are growing in terms of land. In 2023, last year, we installed the first MOTIS receiver on the Calf of Man. So that allows any animals, whether they're birds, bats, or insects, that have been fitted with a tag to be monitored remotely. And we're tagging wheat-ear chicks on the Calf of Man this year, and the receiver station there is detecting them on a daily basis and showing us where they move. And we'll be able to see in which way they disperse. But now the whole world is starting to see a network of MOTIS tags. So wherever our wheat-ear go in the world, hopefully we'll find out about it. And also whatever biodiversity that's been tagged elsewhere that crosses the Isle of Man, we'll learn from them. So we're starting now to embrace technological change for our benefit of wildlife conservation. Then looking at the current year, a significant part of the Irish Sea, shown on the map there, was recognised by the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, to be of international importance for marine mammals. And it mentions in the citation 6 species, so we've got minke whale, grey seal, common dolphin, bottlenose dolphin, Risso's dolphin, and harbour porpoise. So, the waters right in front of you, we've been told by the United Nations, are of international significance for marine mammals. On the other side of the Isle of Man, we're starting to recognise the importance of deep sea mud. So the blue area there is the deep sea or sublittoral mud found in the Western Irish Sea. Really, really important for biodiversity, really important for carbon, also really important for fisheries. So this is where the Dublin Bay prawns are being caught, and they're being caught by bottom dredging. So a very, very destructive fishing technique. I must congratulate DEFRA this year. So again, the brown is the mud on there. These 3 areas in red this year were closed to bottom dredging, so 211 square kilometres. And on the Isle of Man, we don't talk about square kilometres when we are talking about nature conservation. So a real significant change this year. And government support is now helping fishermen and women catch the same fish, but by using creels. So much less destructive pots that are being lowered onto the floor rather than effectively ploughing the seabed. And they get a better premium as a product as well. There's a sea pen on that photo there, a really strange and important animal, very long lived, but very, as you can tell, easily disturbed by bottom dredging. So which is more of those as that part of the island recovers now, or part of the island's waters. And this is only a 3-year temporary measure, we hope to see these become, larger, expanded, connected, and permanent nature reserves in time. Earlier this year, we've gifted Gleondaric an entire valley off the West Baldwin Valley, our 29th nature reserve and our largest, as Leigh mentioned, over 170 acres. And we've also joined the Manx Peat Partnership, which has been set up this year. A third of the island is upland and looking to restore and to manage our upland peat, but in time the lowland peat that we have as well. And the final one, freshwater fish of conservation concern, was published earlier this year. Again, there's more copies of this at the back to highlight the importance of our freshwater environment, but also its perilous state. And the freshwater environment is really, really important because it is what connects land and sea and provides all of these wildlife corridors. We've got migratory salmon, for example, coming up from the sea and reaching the headwaters of our rivers, but they're very, very valuable but easily damaged habitat from septic tanks, agricultural runoff, and weirs and pollution incidents, and so on and so forth. And as of today, I checked our Manx Biological Records database. We've got 8,954 known species for the Isle of Man, of course, and we are just one of those. So I like to include this in any talk I give, just to let people know that this island is home to a hell of a lot more species than just ourselves. And that's quite an impressive measure of our biodiversity for such a small island and what's really quite a young island. It's only about 8 or 10,000 years old since it was split off from our surrounding land masses. So there's a lot of things out there that need our help. And of course, wildlife on islands are always going to be more susceptible to local extinction because they can't be replaced unless they can fly from or swim from elsewhere. Hence, many of the challenges that we've seen. The newest species recorded at the island was the foxbug, which was first recorded in the British Isles at Box Hill in Surrey. It has naturally been expanding northwestwards and was just recorded a couple of weeks ago at Douglas Harbour, so may well have come in on a ferry, and it was seen, photographed there on the outside of a car. So interestingly, with climate change, what we'll probably see on the Isle of Man is our biodiversity increase. So biodiversity being the diversity of species. So our species count will go up as we get warmer, no doubt, but we'll probably see our bioabundance decline, so the actual mantle of wildlife that we have. So the final part now, I'll finish up looking to the future. This is a very short section. So, as I mentioned, next year, biodiversity net gain becomes law on the Isle of Man. We haven't seen the detail of that yet, but it could be a really, really important measure for us as long as it's done correctly. The government has set itself an ambition to have renewable energy on the island by 2026, which is wonderful from a climate change point of view, but does pose significant challenges if it's done poorly. And we're, of course, the island's looking at an onshore wind farm, which is fair to say is in a very, very sensitive area. So it will be a significant challenge to deliver that project without having an irreversible harm on wildlife. And offshore, and the offshore wind farm is about the size of the Isle of Man. And it goes from the mid part of Ramsey Bay all the way to here in Douglas, so it's a significant area. And when we look at the Irish Sea more widely, I believe there's now 19 active wind farm proposals, all currently generating sites within the Irish Sea. So to do that without having a major impact on wildlife will be a big challenge for us. We hope by 2026 that the 3 raw sewage outflows on the Isle of Man will have become a thing on the past. This is a photo I took in June using a drone of the Garwick Bay outflow, which is within one of our strictly protected marine nature reserves. And of course, that's not bringing just the combined bowel contents of the people of Baldrine, but all of the the veterinary products, the medicine products, illegal drugs, house cleaning products, paint. The washings from your driveway and all of the nasties down with it. And as I mentioned before, only 6 years or really 5 years to deliver 30 by 30. And to do that, I've brought there the Lawton principles, which are now of long standing. Our protected areas we need more of them. They need to be bigger, they need to be better for wildlife, and they need to be joined up. Of course, by 2037, the government is aiming for a population of 100,000. So effectively year-round TT levels of people on the Isle of Man, and for such a small island, that will present significant challenges. And a personal gripe of mine is, on the Isle of Man, there was a recent consultation on what pictures we put on our notes, but the government set itself this target, and there was no public consultation at all for that. And if this is realised, there will be significant challenges. So one of the final slides here is looking at the future of the Isle of Man and over the next century, where we see things going. Our woodland cover is about 9% of the Isle of Man at present. The European average is somewhere around about 30%. So I see that we'll have, through projects that we're doing at places like Craig Cowan, a larger area of woodland on the island. Now, of course, that could threaten our agriculture output, but through woodland pasture, which is our ambition for Craig Cowan, we're moving away from having woodland and farmland, saying you can actually have both in the same area. So all woodlands naturally are grazed, and we can do that through farming. Sustainable upland management is something we've really got to get right on the island. 30% or so of the island is upland, most of which is in public ownership, and certainly the areas around Snaefell are chronically overgrazed and have been for a very long time. And where you see nothing but grass on a hill on the Isle of Man shows it's overgrazed, because they should be quite diverse moorlands. The southern hills covered in heather, complete contrast from the areas around Snaefell, and are grazed at a much lower, more sensitive level. And really, we should be seeing, a really diverse structure, including big bilberry bushes and juniper. And so we really need to think about our upland management. And if the hills around Laxey were really sustainably managed, then Laxey wouldn't have flooded a couple of years ago, because all of that water fell in the hills, not directly on top of the village itself. I don't even believe it rained in Laxey on the day when all those houses were flooded just a couple of years back. We need more and varied wetlands, especially for all of that wildlife that uses the Isle of Man as a stopping point. And I'm really pleased to say that wetlands have been a really exciting area of the agri-environment scheme that farmers have been really excited about. And I'm not just talking duck ponds, but we need seasonal inundations, so fields that flood, but only for a couple of weeks, shallow scrapes where birds and other wildlife can walk through. And certainly we need reed beds. We've only got 3 acres of reed bed on the Isle of Man. And I'm glad to say we've got some projects in the pipeline for some considerable expansion of our reed beds. We need to look at coastal managed retreat. So we know the sea is going to rise. We've only got 4 salt marshes on the Isle of Man, so where are they going to be in the future? And thankfully, we do have the option for places like Poldowie and Ramsey. There is further land up that tidal river. Cornay and salt marsh could be relocated for the paddocks there. And if someone is standing in a room similar to this in 50 years' time and we're still bottom trawling on the Isle of Man, we've done something really, really, really badly. And sadly, a lot of Manx residents don't understand the damage that this causes. And I think it's fair to say most people, when they're buying Queen Geese or King Sculls, think they're doing a good thing because they're supporting the Manx economy. But we do need to look at less destructive fishing methods, because it's not sustainable. And we know that on the Isle of Man we can fish things out because we don't catch many herring anymore. And that was one of the biggest industries on the island. Of course, we need nature positive farming, and some of the changes we'll see over the next 3 decades is looking at minimum till or no till agriculture. So, because every time you plough, you destroy a lot of wildlife and you're releasing a huge amount of carbon and creating flood risk and all sorts. But it is difficult to farm without ploughing, and it's expensive. So it will be a significant challenge. Of course, we need effective biosecurity. On the island, in the last few years, we've seen Dutch elm disease, which is now out of control on the island, so we will lose all of our elms. Ash dieback has recently arrived. We know we've got 250 goats on the east coast at Garth, which is stopping all of the natural regeneration, the ancient cliffside coast woods, oak woods there. And we now know that's 1,000 wallabies on the island. And that's quite a lot of herbivory, especially because 600 of them are in our only Ramsar site on the island. And in the Blafkirk, if you go and get down on your knees, there's no vegetation at ground level because there are 600 hungry wallabies there. So we do need to address these challenges. And because we're an island, we have to acknowledge that our wildlife is far more threatened than anywhere else of the comparative size. But actually, because we're an island, it's really, really easy to stop these nasties and problematic species arriving. And every year we're seeing more and more problematic species appearing. And just this year, we had a curlew expert over on the island from the RSPB, and she originally was from New Zealand. And she said, driving around the Isle of Man, I recognise all your plants because they're all from New Zealand. I said, what is going on this island? It's quite bizarre. Of course, and I see in the future as NWT being a major landowner on the island. Of course, we've got 29 nature reserves. We also manage the Carpet Man for Manx National Heritage, and collectively those nature reserves cover about 1% of the island. In my mind, 1% is not enough, as significant as it is, and clearly it's not enough to protect the whole suite of habitats and species we have on the island, and it's certainly not enough to deliver nature's recovery. NWT is in the process right now of transitioning from basically looking after field corners to looking after landscapes. And I'll demonstrate that by looking at one of our early nature reserves, Ballamore Meadow up in Derby, 0.9 of an acre, and you can clearly see it is the corner of a field. It is a really important corner, and we've recorded over 100 species of plants in that field corner, which is quite significant in itself. But our most recent acquisition earlier this year, 170 odd acres, an entire valley, and it takes you an hour to walk from one end of that reserve to the other. It's 2.5 kilometres from one end to the other, and it protects about 4 kilometres worth, of course. And of course, that's just one of 3 nature reserves that we now have within the Baldwin Valley systems. So in time, we may look to how we can better connect and enhance those sites and work with surrounding farmers and landowners to make all the bits in the middle better for nature. I think I've got one more slide to go, but I just wanted to mention that all of our reserves are now on the interactive online map on the government's website called Island Environment. So if you just Google Isle of Man maps, that's the first thing that comes up. So you can see where every single one of our nature reserves is, and you can also click on them. So for example, Fellsfield here, it'll tell you when we bought it, how big it is, whether it's open to the public or not. All of our sites are open to the public. Some of them we just ask you to contact us first for health and safety reasons and to protect rare habitats and species. And each one will take you on a link to our reserves webpage for that site where you can find out more about them. So my final slide is using the sea as a case study, looking at how are we going to achieve 30 by 30 in time. So our really important, incredible network of marine nature reserves covers 10.9% of the Isle of Man at present. When we look at temporary closed areas, so those 3 areas of offshore mud that I mentioned, and also off Maccled, there's a site that's called East of Douglas. For some reason, that's been closed since I think about 2007, maybe not that long. So these temporary areas, another 6%, which means 83% of the Isle of Man has Manx waters has absolutely no protection whatsoever as of today. And in just 6 years' time, we've got to get to 30%, which is adding another 500 kilometres, which is actually the size of the Isle of Man itself. So a significant challenge in a very, very short period of time, recognising we don't have a complete understanding of our seas, and government are very constrained in the amount of resource they have available for this. But really, we can't wait for government to do everything on the Isle of Man, and we have to take the lead in advocacy and in putting sites forward and in understanding our seas and holding them to account to make sure we achieve our 30 by 30 ambitions. Well, thank you very much.
I'll just return to my seat as well.
Yes. If we get a finance one, we'll pull you in.
Does anybody have any questions to Leigh or to David about those two fantastic presentations? No questions. Well, I just want to say one thing. I'm now going on to item 9 on the agenda, which is Chair's closing remarks. I've got a few thank yous. Actually, yes, made a few notes. The first thing I want to say though is I want to thank all of our staff. But first, I want to thank Leigh, our CEO. Leigh's just come back yesterday, I think, from Montserrat. And you're probably thinking, what on earth was Leigh doing in Montserrat? But I'll tell you why it's so important. Because since Leigh's been our CEO, he's really engaged. He won't say he was the first to do this by any means, but he's really engaged very strongly with the wildlife trusts. That's, of course, the Federation of Wildlife Trusts, which I think there are 46 wildlife trusts in total. Now, you might think, well, what does that bring? Well, the Aviva funding, it's about £40 million, was negotiated by the wildlife trusts. And the deal was that they wanted to fund restoration of rainforest projects or rainforest restoration projects. And the part of it was that those projects would benefit from the UK Carbon Code. That doesn't apply to the Isle of Man. And it would have been so very easy for the Wildlife Trust to put the Isle of Man in the too difficult box. So we would have got none of that. So Craigie Cowan, we wouldn't have had. The reason why they didn't put it in the too difficult box, and it was very difficult for them to persuade Aviva to actually include us in that project, was because they know us and they like us and we're really engaged in all of their events and they love Leigh and they like to see Graham. And Graham was I was at an event in the Isle of Wight recently with Graham, and we really do punch well above our weight in terms of the wildlife trusts. They all know us well because of the work we do, and us being an outward-looking organisation is really fundamental to that. And I'll give you another little example. There was a London-based private foundation that wanted to fund environmental projects, and they phoned us up and said, "We'd like to fund you." And it took us a while to figure out, A, that this was not just kind of some weird scam. And secondly, that they'd actually been recommended to speak to us, I think, through the wildlife trusts. Now, why did they just say, go to the Manx Wildlife Trust? They had 46 to choose from. And it's because of our reputation, because of our engagement, because Leigh and the team get out there, go to these events and are well known. And that is replicated not just with our work with the wildlife trusts, also with the other organisations that Leigh mentioned, the UK
Overseas Territories Conservation Forum,
Overseas Territories Conservation Forum, and then the British Islands Forum. Again, I'm going to get the name wrong. These relationships are really key, and they actually bring in hard cash, such as the cash that is paying David's salary, such as the cash that has just bought Craigie Cowan, that is funding staff looking after reserves on the island. So the fact that Leigh's just been to Montserrat for 2 weeks is actually a really important part of the outward-looking culture that we have, and I think it's really important. So I'd like to say thanks to Leigh and to the whole team for that culture. I think it's really important, and it's one we support at the board. Couple of other little comments. I want to thank Foraging Vintners for providing the drink. The other thing I just want to mention is the trustees have decided it's probably time next year to have another recruitment drive to bring in new trustees. We have 10 at the moment. I think we're probably going to get up to 9 next year. We can have up to 14. So if anybody knows anybody out there who might like to be a trustee, look out, because we will be recruiting. The diversity of our board is important. There are lots of middle-aged white men. We'd like to have more women. We should have 50-50, but we don't. So we'd like different people. That's not saying middle-aged white men aren't welcome. But we are looking to have a more of a mix of people. That's actually really important to us in many ways. So look out for that. If anybody is interested or knows somebody who might be, just bear that in mind. That's probably going to happen in the next in the new year after Christmas, actually. I think that's my list done. So thank you all for coming. Sorry, I want to thank somebody else. I want to thank all our volunteers, our board, our volunteers, our volunteers who aren't necessarily members, most are, who look after our reserves, our nature discovery centres, who man our shop, who come into the office and help us on a whole variety of different tasks. It's all incredibly valuable. So thank you. And Leigh's just reminded me to ask, has anybody got any other business? Yes.
I just had a question, obviously, from last year's minutes and the effort to separate the like the work that's done for the agri-environment scheme and the ecology parts. I know that there was a hope that you could become a statutory consulting, which would help with how government perceive what our expectation is, and obviously that hasn't happened. So where we are really with, if we look at the wind farm being the key one of the efforts from last year was about bird surveys. I've obviously been quite hands-on with it, and we've had what can only be termed as willful disturbance, and we've got letters into DEFO, we've got evidence, we've got photographs. What has Manx Wildlife Trust done on that part of it? We had, whether the intention was to have more bird surveys happening, is that something that is happening?
I'll check that.
Yeah.
We've not done anything because we haven't been contracted or asked to do anything, and on that basis, we're probably, as a lot of people on the island are, waiting to see the process that plays out. Now, some people think that's we think that's the right place for us to be. What I would say, and I am keen that we get them, that we keep confidence, is that we might not be on a hill with a placard, but we're having some very strong and robust communication behind the scenes, and our fundamental principles around it remain that we do think climate change is happening, think it's real, we believe it's real as an organisation.
No dispute.
And we absolutely feel that the island needs to move towards renewable energy. And we want and expect the island to do the right renewable energy in the right place, brackets places. And if results of surveys or anything else comes out that we think are either saying that there's a wrong place being chosen, be that a wind farm in the sea or a wind farm on land or a solar panel farm at GAB or wherever else, then at that point we have evidence that we can stand up and credibly do something about and maybe go to the next stage. But as of right now, that isn't the case, and we are expecting, trusting and waiting for results to come out that of all the projects before we might do anything. And what we must do is remain professional in our role, that we don't jump a gun and we don't go on hearsay, and we're not pushed into being used as any sort of a tool on anything. We're waiting for evidence that we could professionally comment on or challenge if necessary, and if and when that happens, then I assure you we champion nature.
I think that's my query with it, is if you're not doing any survey work or you're not helping promote good practice for the EIA, if there's only a small number of people that highlight what's going wrong, you're going to be presented with data that's not going to be factual. I mean, we went through a presentation from the MUA, and Paul Crane, who used to be a champion of Manx Wildlife Trust, told me that there was no hen harriers. You've been told there was no hen harriers. And I said, I've got photographs and videos, and I've got a lot of good people that are documenting the hen harriers. And then the next meeting I was attending with him, I said, you are aware there are hen harriers, there's the nest that have been recorded this year, because we've been very careful to make sure there was the data, and that's just one species. We've I've shared details of long-eared owls, which I know have been recorded, and it's interesting that they're close to the SODAR device, because nobody knows what the impact of what's happening is having on the wildlife, but there's definitely been impact in the way the EIA has been conducted. So that's where, as in your interest of protecting wildlife, if you've not done any survey of what's happening today, how can you go on what's presented to you? Makes sense.
I think there's a birding community that's knowledgeable, and as I'm aware, and David, I might ask you to comment, but as I'm aware, nothing's been put on the table as a firm. This is exactly the the ecological surveys are still ongoing, they're not finished yet. So there's nothing on the table that's a complete ecological survey done for that site. Now, when there is, then we can comment on it, and we'll do that. And there won't be a day in between that done and potential any work. There'll be a proper consultation process. And if we don't like the report that's put on the table, we can challenge it at that point. That's the appropriate time to challenge it. And we would do that robustly. And again, I'm not going to say what we've done behind the scenes, but I will assure you that questions about process, methodology have gone from us to the right people in black and white, and maybe we pull that out of a drawer in time. But right now, I'm not prepared to share that publicly, because I don't think that's right for us to do that, and I don't think as an organisation we want to stay at the table, because there's big landscape scale things we want to influence, and I don't want us marginalised away from the table on all these projects of the future. But as and when a proper EAA report's put on the table that we can critique, I assure you, I think I'd have to put chains on David and his team not to interrogate that report thoroughly when it comes out, and we'll have a professional comment on it.
Yeah.
And but I think on Langness there's another example where potentially a site was surveyed. As I understand it, the result from that was a positive one, because it was challenged at the right time.
Yeah.
With the right people and the right evidence to rebuke what weren't credible ecological surveys. That's my perception of it, and that's the role we need to play. We can't go on what ifs and buts.
Yeah, no, that was
we need to have evidence on the table that we can challenge. There's a lot of water to go under a lot of bridges, before anything potentially happens anywhere. That's my belief. But I assure you, it's not that we're not doing anything. We are, in my eyes, and I believe our board's eyes, doing it in a professional, measured way when we can act if we need to. That's the strongest assurance I can give you. We're certainly not doing anything. I don't know if Simon or...
I think I don't have anything to add to that much.
I guess I'd like to add, we've updated this year our renewable energy policy, and that's on our website. And it covers both on land and at sea. So I would encourage all members to read that. And effectively what it says is we support the transition to green energy, but in a way that doesn't cause irreparable damage to our most important habitats and species. And in terms of the onshore wind farm proposals, we looked through in great detail all of their proposed surveys earlier this year, and we had, I think it was about 45 pages of comments that we sent the MU on those. But effectively saying, look, if we were doing this, this is how we would do it. So we've addressed, and they're aware of what we think are shortfalls, shortcomings with that. As have DEFRA. So DEFRA's ecologists have commented on their scoping report, and I believe in fact that is on publicly available online. That goes on for hundreds of pages. So I think it's fair to say any shortcomings are known to both the MUA and to their subcontractors. And then in terms of your other question on planning, of course DEFRA are taking a review at the minute, the Built Environment Reform Programme, completely looking at how planning is done on the island. They're looking to streamline it and make the process quicker. We've been unsuccessful in regaining our historic statutory consultee status, and the reason is DEFRA's ecologists and also the ecologist at Manx National Heritage review all the planning applications. So they're saying that there's 2 statutory consultees from an ecological point of view already. However, we do look through all planning. And we do find some planning, and I'm very confident to say it would have been Manx Wildlife Trust who were behind the Poldery proposals being rejected by the planning committee, which is really important site for nature. And it's been our opposition that has so far stopped Ramsey Marina being zoned for development on South Beach in Ramsey. So we regardless of not having our statutory consultee status, it's not holding us back in fighting inappropriate development.
Yeah, and I think those 2 projects that David mentioned were far further down the road. We just need to. We waited for the evidence, and we do process, and my role is absolutely that we do it professional.
Yeah.
But we do it.
Thank you. Any other business or questions? No, right, well, in that case, thank you all very much for attending, and hereby close our annual general meeting. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.